Hello everyone, and welcome to another in the series of online sessions supporting teachers using the Fly High series with English in the 7th, 8th and coming soon the 9th year. This is on behalf of Edison's ASA, and today we're going to be looking at personalisation in the classroom, giving the students the opportunity to be the central focal point of the classroom and having the opportunity to talk all about themselves in activities. We'll be looking at why this is a good thing to do, how we can do it in terms of techniques and approaches and specific activities, and we'll also be looking at some of the possible pitfalls and how to avoid those or sidestep those to make the activities as successful and enjoyable as possible for teacher and students. So let's take a look at one particular example. If anyone has been to one of my training sessions before, you may well have seen one of these. It's one of my favorite activities. It's called a Johari Window. It looks like this on paper. Johari, because it's the name of the two psychologists who invented it combined. I think one was called John and the other was called Harrison. They put their names together to make Johari. And in this version of the Johari Window, I've got my name at the top, and so the vertical columns are mine, a yes column on the left and a no column on the right. And then I've got the name of my imaginary partner on the left. That's Grimhild, which is one of my favorite names. And she's got the top row for yes and the bottom row for no. So Grimhild and I will be talking, let's imagine, about our experience of travel and holidays. And I might ask Grimhild, oh, have you ever been to Egypt? And Grimhild would answer, no, I've never been to Egypt. I'd love to. Have you? And I say, yes, I went to Egypt about 5 or 6 years ago. It was fantastic. We went on the boat on the Nile. I absolutely loved it. And so therefore, Egypt appears in the left-hand column, which is yes for me, and the bottom row, which is no for Grimhild. So there's our first one. Now, Grimhild might then ask me, and what about Barcelona? Have you been to Barcelona? And I would say, oh yeah, I went to Barcelona only once, about 20 years ago. Loved it. I'd love to go back. One day I will. What about you, Grimhild? Have you been there? And she would say, yes, it's my favorite city. I go every time I possibly can. And so therefore, Barcelona appears in the yes column for me and the yes row for Grimhild in the top left. And then as the conversation continued, we might say, what about the USA? Have you been to the USA? And we both say, no, never been to the USA. I'd like to one day. It's a long way away though. Long haul flights, not good for the environment and also very expensive. And so USA would appear in the no column for me and the no row for Grimhild in the bottom right corner. And the conversation would continue, the aim being, of course, to try to fill all the spaces in all the boxes within the time given us by our teacher. This is one of my favorite activities and one that I find works very well for students once they get used to the idea. The first time is always a bit, oh, what are we doing? And then they get the idea. For a number of reasons. It's very fulfilling. It's very satisfying to build this information and to have a record of your conversation as you go along. And talking all about yourself, obviously, and your experiences is something very fulfilling. As we're doing this, we are sharing information with each other. We are learning about each other. We are bonding with each other and just improving that overall connectedness in the classroom, which is very important in a communicative classroom for that to work properly. It's great because it has a goal. It has an outcome. You know when you've finished. You've got something to aim for and you keep going and going until you finally get there. The difficult ones are the no, yes, and yes, no for each person. But eventually students do get there. You can reduce the number of items in each box, of course, to make it more achievable. But having a goal and having an outcome is very important. We'll go back over all of these factors in a little while. And it's finite. There's an endpoint, it's achievable, they know they can do it, they can see that they don't have to go on forever. That's a big advantage. It has a visible endpoint. And while you're doing it, it's not a completely controlled and limited exercise. There is the opportunity for expansion to talk about how much you enjoyed it, when you went to a particular place, why you liked it, etc. Although your basic conversation is always going to be about the one particular topic, you can expand it into other areas and other comments and other sharing opportunities. So those are several reasons why the Johari window is an excellent personalization activity. It's quick and easy to set up. Once the students have done it once, they'll remember it and they'll find it easier to do the times after. The first time, as I say, is always a bit, what are we doing? Then they get it. Very successful activity. But let's come back to that question of why we should personalize in the classroom rather than, for example, completing exercises or doing pronunciation drills or talking about something which you've just seen a video about, which is not necessarily about you. There's all sorts of reasons why distinct personalization is a good thing. It really helps students recognize the value of what we've been studying in class, if they can then use it to talk about themselves. It's the one thing they can recognize they're going to do at various points in their future is talk about themselves. If they're at a job interview, if they're on a date, and all sorts of situations, it's something that they can recognize, this is something I will do. Maybe in English, maybe in not, but it's a function that they will carry out. Why should we personalize? It means every single student has something to say, even if they have never been to any of these countries. That is a personalized contribution, for example. They do have something to say and they can include it in the limited time that is there for their production. When they are personalizing this information, of course, as personal information, is already stored in their heads, in their brains, in the different areas. And when they relate new structures and new vocabulary, new grammar, etc. to what is already stored, it makes it much more memorable, more easy to retrieve in the future, and it gives a much better chance of that grammar and vocabulary being effectively memorized and available for retrieval later, because it's stored alongside things which are already familiar to them. It gives students, especially teenage students, we know this is important, the opportunity to express themselves and to establish themselves among their peers, and also to make that connection with the teacher. We'll come back to that in a moment. Very important, as we know, for adolescent teenage students to establish themselves in the sort of milieu and the ranking of the peers around them, to show who they are and to show how they fit in. This is part of bonding with the group. The better bonding we can establish within our group of students, the better our lessons will go overall, because they'll have that feeling of belonging, they'll have that feeling of trust, they'll have that feeling of wanting to interact with others. Oxytocin, I put in brackets there, is the chemical in the brain. Again, we're going to talk about that very briefly in a little while. That helps people feel that they are bonding and welcome and trusting others in the group. And they are playing a proactive role in the classroom. It's the student's chance to be in charge, to lead the conversation, to decide what's going to be said and how and why and when. They are the focal point at this point in the classroom. You might say that they are taking back the right to the classroom, just in the same way as Henri Lefebvre, the French philosopher, said that people had the right to the city, to take back and co-create with the place where they live. Students have the similar right to the classroom and to direct and to create what goes on in the classroom, and personalization is a great way to do that and feel fulfilled doing so. There are opportunities built into the Fly High series at lots of different points. The principal ones are, you will see coming up again and again after each major input, the Hey You feature, where students are given the opportunity to express themselves and to share their ideas and preferences and opinions on what has just been studied, relating what they've studied to their everyday lives. There is the Now You feature, where students are given the chance to follow a model to write or talk about themselves in different communicative situations, be it an email or a dialogue. They get to put themselves into that activity and personalize it in that way. And there are look around you activities built in throughout the book, which gives the students the opportunity to reflect and to give their opinions on things they've just studied, a video they've just watched, for example, and to, again, express themselves around that topic and let others know how they feel about it. Very important. So all of these opportunities, especially the Hey You, built in at regular intervals to give the students that full opportunity to personalize their contributions to the class. It's important, or it's helpful, certainly, as we mentioned earlier, to have goals and limits to these activities. It's great to have a concrete outcome, something the students are working towards, so they know when they finish and they know what they need to produce and aim for. You can make it as simple as a topic to talk about and find 3 things that you have in common with your partner. It doesn't need to be a list, it doesn't need to be a grid, it doesn't need to be a Johari window. But if they have 3 things to find, they know what their aim is, they know what their goal is, and they can keep going until they find those 3 things. It gives a direction to the interaction. Or you can put a time limit. For example, here, how many things can you find in common in 2 minutes? So they've got a direction for the conversation, finding things in common, and they know that there's also a limit to the interaction. And so it gives students the idea that this is not going to drag on, especially for students who are less able to talk fluently and confidently. They know that they got something to achieve and a limited time to do it. It can be as simple as, at the end of the interaction, when they're talking about their preferences or experiences or opinions, talk about this particular topic and then decide who, for example, had the better weekend, has more experience of travel, has the best film recommendation, has the most interesting job ambition, something like that. Round up that conversation, give it a final direction and an outcome. Making a decision at the end of a conversation gives it direction, gives it meaning, gives it purpose, and makes it more fulfilling as well. Or you can actually make lists of things. Make a list of 5 or 6 or 2 or 3 or 10 places to go on holiday, gadgets that make your life better, professions you'd love to do, professions you'd hate to do. Giving that concrete aim and direction for the conversation really helps it flow and persist until they've reached that end point of the list, for example. And as we've already mentioned, time limits are important and a great way to give students a sense of purpose and direction. When you're giving a time limit, be aware of what you can reasonably expect students to do. Now, the most fluent and outgoing and talkative of your students may be able to go on and on indefinitely, especially if they're talking to someone that they're friends with and they know and like. On the other hand, there are those in every class, of course, who are less able, less fluent, less outgoing, less talkative, and it's actually difficult to carry on a conversation beyond a minute or 2. Even in the most advanced Cambridge exam level, the certificate of proficiency in English, Students are only asked to talk individually for 2 minutes at a time, and that's already quite challenging, or 3 minutes with their partner. And so we can see even at the advanced level, the super advanced level of Cambridge exams, the time limit is not particularly extended. A little experience of mine that I once had when I did a Portuguese exam. I was starting my application to have Portuguese nationality, and I needed to prove my Portuguese language level. So I did a Portuguese exam, and part of the exam was a free speaking period. And they said, here is your topic, have a little preparation time. We're going to talk about preparation time in a moment. And then you will have 5 minutes to talk about this topic. And 5 minutes feels like eternity when it's not something you're particularly interested in, or you're in a stressful situation like an exam, or let's remember that even being called upon to speak English for an extended period is stressful for some of our students. So make sure that the time limits we set are reasonable. 5 minutes, in my opinion, is too long for most students. So there are some of these pitfalls. The time limit is something we need to be aware of. Don't ask your students to go on for too long. Pitfalls and safeguards. How can we prepare for and act against these possible drawbacks? Number one, don't ask them to go on for too long. It will lead to some students feeling inadequate, that they can't keep going for that long, and bored while they wait for all the others to stop. Another thing to consider is noise. If you've got a class of 30 students, and of course some of us do, and you put them in pairs and ask them all to do this activity at the same time, it will inevitably create noise. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing. In fact, it's one of my favorite things to hear in the classroom is the buzz or the clamor of 30 students in conversation at the same time. But we need to be aware that this is going to happen. We need to prepare ourselves for the fact that there's going to be a higher noise level than usual, and not to get freaked out about it. But also that sometimes the noise level gets too high and makes it difficult for students to actually communicate effectively, because there's so much noise around them they can't hear. In which case, it is a good idea to have a signal. You may just choose to put your hand in the air and say noise, noise, noise. And if your students are aware of what you mean, explain it beforehand. They mean that means they need to bring the level of the noise down a little, modulate their voices, try and speak a little more quietly. If they recognize this is a problem, students go along with this. I've also had something I used on the board where I had a noise meter going from green through amber to red, and when the noise meter hit red, I would again give some sort of signal. I had an electronic sound I used at one point. The students would look up, see the noise meter, realize what I wanted to say. I didn't have to shout. They would bring their noise down and carry on with the activity. But noise, if you're getting students all to talk at the same time, is inevitable and good. Have you ever had students who, when you ask them to talk about something, would say, "But I've got no ideas, teacher"? We've talked about this in previous sessions, and it is a very real thing for some of them. We'll talk about this in just a little bit, but I mean, one of the good things about personalisation is that in theory, students all have some ideas because they've all had a life experience. Not all of them have travelled as much as some of the others in the class. Not all of them have tried as many different foods, etc. But they should all have some ideas. We're going to come back to this just a little later and see how we can sidestep this particular problem, but there is a way around it. Another one is, my partner doesn't understand me. You put them in pairs to talk about something, and you may have an extremely fluent student working with one who has great difficulty. One simple way around this is to make part of the speaking activity for the strong student to try and teach the language that their partner needs to express themselves in a basic way. If the student recognizes that teaching something is the best possible way to learn it, then they'll start to get the idea that they can really get something out of an activity where they're working with someone whose level is lower than their own. We've also got, in a little bit, another way to get around this particular problem. But once they get the idea that they can help their partner and learn and benefit by doing so, that sidesteps that problem. I would say that the teacher-student interaction should be kept to a minimum. I've been in lots of classes over my 35 years as teaching, and as a trainer, I've observed hundreds and hundreds of classes, literally. I've very often seen teachers doing personalized interaction on an individual level. Teacher asks student a question, student answers, everyone else listens. Teacher says, very good, thank you, and then asks another student, and then asks another student, and all the time, only one student is ever in interaction with the student, with the teacher, and all the other 29 students, if you have a full class, are sitting and waiting, and some of them are listening, but not all of them, as we know. And so it's a great way to leave 29 or the majority of your students idle. This is why setting your classroom up to facilitate student-student interaction, giving your students a standard usual pair partner to work with. So when you say work in pairs, they know who their default partner is going to be. You might choose to shake it up now and again, but they know who their default partner is. And then you can have 15 pairs going at the same time rather than one teacher and one student, and that's much more productive. It's maximizing your classroom time. And another thing that can leave students a bit unsure of how they're going to do this activity is if the instructions are too vague. If you just say, talk about travel, then there's going to be, of your 30 students, maybe 18 of them who are going to think, but what do we say? What do you mean? Talk up, what, how, oh, 2 minutes starting now. And they don't have enough information to get on with the activity, enough direction, enough prompts, enough guidance. The Fly High course books are excellent at doing this. They will give you great guidance for how you can give this interaction direction. It can be something as simple as, you will find in the Hey You sections, something as simple as a few statements which the students look at and read and think about, very important, coming to that in a moment, and then complete with their own ideas and experiences and opinions, and then share with a partner. It can be something as simple as that to prompt personalization. I think we shouldn't forget the value of an activity which is, now make this true for you. They've just completed sentences in a grammar controlled written practice, but what they can do is then take those sentences, personalize them, and share them with their partner. And some of the interactions in the Fly High coursebook are designed like this. It's great for the less able students because they can think, they can look, they can practice in their head, and then they're ready to produce, and it's still fully personalized. Preparation time. This is one of the great things about that, looking and thinking and being ready to talk. Preparation time is necessary for a lot of students, introverts especially. We sometimes forget about the introverts in our classroom. They're not obviously as vocal and as ever present and verbal as the extroverts in the class. The extroverts are the ones who have their hands in the air and want to give the answer and enjoy talking and laughing and making a joke about things. And the introverts are those who will enjoy the conversation if they feel that they've had the preparation time to say something valid and valuable, because they're going to be sharing something about themselves, and that's not always comfortable. If everyone has a little thinking time, and you need sometimes to persuade the extroverted students to wait for a moment, then everyone, including the introverted students, can produce and contribute fully because they've had time to think about what they're going to say, something of value, They can decide what they want to share and what they don't, and it makes the whole activity much more comfortable. There are those, you may have come across these students, or you may not, if you're lucky. Students whose instant reaction to any question you ask them is Silla! There are those, aren't there? But if you force them to stop and look and think and prepare, then even those students who, we mentioned them just earlier, who's, I don't have any ideas, I don't know what to say. If there's a preparation time and a preparation basis and they need to look at something and think about it before producing, then that takes away the Silla reaction and they do have something to say. Giving time then for these ideas to surface. If students are categorizing vocabulary into different groups, positive adjectives and negative adjectives, or if they're ranking things in order, countries they'd like to visit or not like to visit, jobs they'd like to have or not, brainstorming different ideas for a problem or a topic, then that gives ideas time to start to circulate, start to assess whether they're ideas they want to share, and then they're ready to come out at the moment when sharing is called for. Having something to do to help organize those thoughts is a great way to get students feeling fully prepared to contribute. Coming back to Cambridge exams, I was an examiner for Cambridge exams for about 25 years, I think. And the most recent versions of Cambridge exams always have some thinking time built in. When you give to the pair of candidates who are sitting in the Cambridge exam some pictures to talk about, there will be a phrase something like, first you have some time to look at the pictures, and the students will use that time, the candidates, sorry, will use that time to look at the pictures, and ideas will start to come up, and they start to go fetching vocabulary they need, so they know they've got something to say which is going to phrase it in a good way. Cambridge exams have recognised this. I think we all should, and give that thinking time as a built-in part of any productive exercise. Some people don't need it. Some people are spontaneous. There's a large group of our students who are not and really appreciate it. So sharing. We talked about sharing earlier. We talked about the chemicals in the brain that get produced. It's important. Otherwise, what's the point of spending this time talking about something that you're very familiar with someone who you know quite well, unless you're then going to share it with the rest of the group? That might be what some students are thinking. So having exchanged that information, then giving them the chance to share it with others, whether it's the whole group or whether it's another person, another individual, or whether they're going to be writing something about it and posting it, that some sort of sharing is going to come out of this interaction really helps, again, give it purpose, give it meaning, give it some sort of fulfillment. If you're going to ask students to share with the rest of the group, then make sure they know beforehand that they're going to be reporting back on what their partner says. It helps them remember, it helps them focus, and it helps them not be in that situation when the teacher says, so João, tell us what Yara said. And João goes, oh, I don't know, can't remember. But if they're focused on what's being said and they know they're going to have to report in a moment, they'll fix it better in the brain, and that can only be a good thing. Sharing helps the group cohesion. We talked about this, learning about each other, sharing ideas, sharing opinions, opening up something a little bit about you, starting to trust or improving on the trust you have with the other people in the group, appreciating their ideas and listening to them and reacting to them. And as you're doing this, the chemical oxytocin is being produced in the brain. Oxytocin, which has been called the cuddle chemical or the hug hormone or even the love drug. It's associated with all these feelings of sharing and trusting and feeling comfortable and bonding with others on an individual or group level. And sharing what you've learned about someone else is a great way to get this bonding and this chemical circulating in the brain. And if you do share with others, what it also gives students, and we'll talk about this in just a little more in just a moment, is a second chance to talk about it again. So they had that chat with their partner, and maybe that wasn't entirely to their satisfaction. They felt they could do it better. And now, because they're asked to talk about it again with someone else, they get the chance to do it again and do it better. So let's have a look at that in just a moment. Sorry, I forgot there's one more. It's also an opportunity, and this is very important and is sometimes forgotten, the opportunity for the teacher to share with the group something about herself or himself. We don't always, do we? We don't always share things about ourselves with our students, but it really helps class cohesion and that trusting relationship between you and the students if you do share something about yourself. And it helps the students realize that you're a real person, as well as being a teacher, that you have opinions and that maybe you have the same opinion and the same preference as they do. And that really helps improve these interconnections within the class and helps them see you as a real person and helps the classes overall flow better because they feel that connection with you. It's a great opportunity for that. Extension and variation strategies. So there are various different ways we can expand upon this. We can build in variation, we can keep it fresh. One of which is answer for your partner. If you know your partner even a little bit, what you can do is, rather than talking about yourself, you can talk about yourself as if you were your partner and use the ideas and opinions and experiences you think your partner has had. It's a great exercise in spontaneity, in creativity. Don't forget, preparation time first. And it's also quite funny, because obviously you will say things which are totally not true about your partner. And then you get to feedback with your partner at the end and decide how much you said was complete rubbish and how much was right. It's great fun to try and speak on behalf of your partner. Or you can, for those who are less willing to talk about themselves, it's worth remembering that there are people who do not like to share that much. So answer or talk, you talk using the ideas and opinions and preferences and experiences of someone you've just learned about. You've just learned about, for example, a teenager who has started a charity which is making $1 million a year and helping poor people around the world. You've just learned about a gymnast who has learned the importance of mental health for being a top sports person, etc. Answer for that person and use what you think are their experiences. The language output is still as valuable. There's a lot of thinking going on behind, which makes the whole exercise more memorable and more involved. And it just gives a different direction to personalize your contributions. One thing I love to do is when you've got your students doing something simple, they're talking about, for example, their holidays. I love to do this when they just come back from their Christmas or their Easter or their summer holiday. You get them to talk about what they did, and in the middle of what they say, preparation time is necessary. They include one thing which is not true. They tell one lie. At the end of their minute talking, the partner has to guess what the lie was. It's a great way, again, to keep the conversation going. They are trying to sound as natural as possible about things they did, and that one thing they didn't do. For example, include one lie in your contribution and then have your partner guess it at the end. It's a great way to get your partner to listen closely as well, of course. Or on the other hand, you can take it to the other extreme. You can tell a whole string of lies and only include one true thing, and then have your partner guess it. Of course, preparation time is necessary here, otherwise students would find it very difficult. Most students would find it very difficult to invent a whole contribution full of lies. Others wouldn't. Do it in mime and drawings. There are students in our groups, of course, in every single class we have a student who is less than able to accompany the tasks that are given to them and to share information in a foreign language for 2 whole minutes or even more. But if we ask that student not to do their contribution in words or sentences, but in mime or drawings, and then the partner can turn that into something verbally produced, then English is still coming out. They are producing something on paper or in mime, and their partner is translating it into English, and so they therefore have contributed something valuable. This is a technique which is used with students who have maybe some cognitive disability, and they are not able to fully express themselves using their words, and so they use a communicative panel full of pictures and symbols to point to and explain what they want and what they need and what they mean. And it's a great way to get students who are less communicatively able to be able to contribute and communicate and to be part of a class. You'll always have people who say, but if they ask them to do it in mime or drawings, it means they're never going to learn to speak. Not true. It's been shown again and again and again that students who have this cognitive disability maybe, or a lack of ability or a lack of confidence to produce something orally, if they do it first through a communicative panel or mime or drawings, and they hear that turned into verbal English or verbal production of any kind, then it encourages them to become verbal more quickly. Try it. It's also great fun. You'll have lots of people laughing if you have one person in each pair trying to do things through mime. Simple fun. And so I mentioned this a little bit earlier. And the headline at the top of this page, now do it all again. It doesn't sound very fulfilling, does it? It doesn't sound very motivating. But if you try it out, you'll find it is. Doing it all again, it might sound like a drag. And the first time you do it, students might think, oh, why do we have to do it again? We've already done it once. But once they get the idea, this has, with every group that I've done, it has always been a popular option. And let me explain why. When you ask students to do a whole activity again with someone different, they find that they are more fluid and more fluent, they're less nervous, and they make fewer mistakes. They include more detail because they have more bandwidth to think about what they want to include rather than are they going to make a mistake. They feel they have more time to listen and respond and encourage their partner, and they feel overall greater satisfaction the second time round they do something. If you ask them at the end, did you do it better the first time or the second time? 90% of your students will say it was better the second time. And so, did you enjoy it more the first or the second time? Second time, much better, yeah. Do you want to do it again? The third time, half of them will say, yeah, let's do it again. They can feel themselves improving. There's more chemicals floating around the brain, dopamine being the primary one, going, that was great, I want to do it again. Doing something all over again with someone new who hasn't heard their experiences and opinions and preferences before is a great way to really get them feeling I'm improving right here and now. Make sure you give them a chance to reflect on it. Don't just say, good, you've done it again, now let's do something different. Say, great, you've done it again. Did it feel better this time? What improved? Did you make fewer mistakes? How did you feel? The feedback, guarantee you, will be positive. And then one final thing which I always try to include is movement. Now, movement, especially in a language classroom, but I think in any classroom, is important. And a lot of students do spend a lot of time every day sitting on a chair and not moving for an entire lesson. They only get up and move between classrooms. Movement is really important in the language classroom. It gets the blood flowing, it gets the brain thinking better. It's a common approach used in psychological therapy, not to sit opposite each other and look deep into each other's eyes, but to walk and talk. It means you're not in a confrontational position, and that you're side by side and walking along, and the very fact that you're walking and progressing and moving encourages people to open up a little more. And walk and talk, as I say, is a common approach in therapy, and so move and talk is a great approach to use in the classroom. It just gets things flowing a little more. There's various ways to do it. The most simple way is just to say, right, João, you're going to work with Alice over there. Rodrigo, you're going to work with Yara over here, and get them to move before they start. And then get them to move again when they do it all over again with a different partner. Or you can have something a little more formal and arranged. If you get your students to stand in 2 lines facing each other, now if you've got a big class, 15 students is a long line to have. You may not have room in your classroom, but if you do, if you can arrange it somehow that you get 15 students in a line in your classroom and another 15 students facing them, then that movement, that rearranging themselves, you let them know that the person they're going to be opposite is the one you're going to talk to, and when they line up they see that person opposite them and they can already start to imagine the conversation. It's something like this. There we go, we've got 2 lines of students, they're facing each other, and then you explain to them that they're going to talk for 30 seconds or a minute, and then one person from the end of each line is going to move. So this person, for example, will move all the way to the other end of the line, and this person will move all the way to this end of the line. And that means the next time they will all have a new partner. They'll be opposite someone new. They have to shuffle along a bit to make sure the lines match now. And you do this again and again and again. And the very fact that they're moving in between each time really helps them keep going and sharing and learning and exchanging. It's very, very motivating, and movement is a big part of it. There's another way to do this. You can have students in concentric rings. 15 students, if you have space, in an inner ring, and then another 15 students around the outside. Here's a smaller version of it. And then at the end of each turn, they've got a partner opposite them with whom they speak for 30 seconds or a minute, and then everyone moves one place to the right, and they get a new partner, and they do it all again. And the movement combined with the new person each time is a great way to keep the whole thing going and get them doing it all over again and improving and getting more confident and feeling more able as they go along. Or just have the students get up and move around and mingle and talk to each other, standing up, moving around the classroom, standing by the window, wherever they want to be. Move around, find someone to talk to them for the time that you set, and then you might choose to say, okay, move on. And they find someone new. Again, they'll be standing, moving, activating their whole blood flow. Or you might have students who have a question each on a piece of paper. They'll start with the person they're opposite, and they'll talk about their questions. At the end of the time, when you ask them to say stop and move, they'll exchange papers. So they have a new question to talk about, and they'll go and find someone different and carry on the conversation. After a while, they will just talk, swap, find someone new, and you don't even need to intervene and tell them it's time to change. In this particular diagram, it actually looks rather like the girl in the middle is holding up the 2 guys at gunpoint, and they've surrendered. Anyway, but it is a great way to get students more active, get them out of their seats. Teenage students will tell you, we don't want to move. And then when they do, they really enjoy it. It also gives them the chance to keep circling until they find that one in the class they fancy, and they can talk to that pretty girl or the pretty guy. And also a motivation to keep moving, to keep talking, to keep it going. So there we go. Ways to make fulfilling, engaging activities in the classroom where students always have something to say if we give them the necessary preparation time. They can make connections with their partners, they can extend those connections out into the classroom and to the teacher as well. They get those chemicals going in the brain which makes them feel better about who they are and how they feel about each other people in the class. And also, as they move around and do things again and again, they start to feel that they're improving and getting more fluent and more confident. And that means they're going to keep wanting to come back to your classes and talk about themselves all over again the next time. Hope it goes well. Thank you. See you soon. Bye-bye.